Well, what a great event this is. Beautifully organised.
There we go.
I nearly went fishing today. $1 million fish upgraded another 20 barra to $1 million. So there's 80 of them out there. And surely the $1 million fish now in its 9th season is the pinnacle that we've reached in recreational fishing development and certainly promotion. And 80 fish, someone's going to catch it, hopefully. But I'd like to start off, I'm going to do a little bit of a history as I talk, and a lot of this is written down, I've had to do that. But let's go back nearly half a century, 44 years ago. It was March 1980, and we were having a big wet, similar to the one we're experiencing now. The Daly River was so flooded that a couple of mates and I launched just below the police station onto the Daly River Road, and then motored all the way down to the mouth. Along the way, seeing commercial barra boats, gill nets. Back in those days, the closure line was at the cattle yards. If you know where if you know the Daly at all, you know that the cattle yards are a fair way up, probably 25 kilometres. And when we got down to the mouth, we were going to stay on a pro boat. The bloke who owned it, he was on his own, and he worked with. I work with his wife. Anyway, when we got down there, we counted 23 commercial barra boats, each with a 1,000-metre endorsement. So you're talking over 20 kilometres of net. Now that net was up inside the river, down around Palm Island, out from the mouth of the Daly, and spread out through Anson Bay. I mean, there were boats jostling for space with their nets all the way across that brilliant waterway. One morning, the pro on the boat we were staying on, because what we were doing, we were going up the river to do our fishing and then coming back to stay on the boat. But one morning he said, there's a creek over here that, why don't you guys go and fish that today? He said, it's my turn to net it. It's my turn to close it right off, so I'll keep my nets out of it. And they were certainly very organised. But counting all those boats and all those nets, you can imagine what was going through my mind. And one evening, we actually came down, it was dark, and we got lost. It took us 2 or 3 hours before we finally found his boat. We ended up almost at the Perrin Islands at one stage with a spotlight, trying to work our way around the maze of nets. I mean, there was no chance that anything could get through all that. So 1980 was also the year that the Amateur Fishermen's Association NT, AFANT, was formed. At the time, there were over 120 commercial barra licences operating in the NT, and there were some fierce words spoken between AFANT and the Commercial Fishermen's Association, which represented the commercial barra fishermen at the time. Lobbying of government through the 80s resulted in some early licence buyback schemes. Also in the 80s, the big rivers in Kakadu were closed by the Federal Department of Environment, and that was a good thing for anglers, closing the South Alligator and the East Alligator and the Wyoming and the West Alligator. But it did what is sort of happening now, only on a much bigger scale, because it then forced the commercial fishermen who were in those rivers to go elsewhere. And guess where most of their attention went? To the Mary and the Daly River. Angler catch rates in the iconic Corroboree Billabong angler catch rates in the iconic Corroboree Billabong on the Mary River system were abysmal. And this was evidenced by the poor catches in the first 3 NT Barra Classics, which were held from 1982 to 1984 on Corroboree. So both the Mary and the Daly, from an angling perspective, were in danger, and our catch rates were showing that. Finally, the government and fisheries took notice, and an assessment of the state of the Mary River barra stocks took place. This was quite amazing. The upshot was that fisheries identified that the barramundi stocks in the Mary River system were on the verge of collapse. Can you believe that? That's how severely depleted they were. Obviously, it called for immediate action, and in 1986, the Mary River was closed to commercial fishing for an additional 4 months on top of the 4 months that it's already closed for each year, all the commercial fishery, for both 1986 and 87. And in 1988 onwards, it would be closed completely to commercial fishing. So the Mary River was closed down to the mouth. If you know the Mary, you'd know it's comprised of Sampan Creek and Tommycut Creek, which form, the Mary River's a delta, so that's what forms the Mary River Delta. And so as part of the closure, a box was put outside the mouth of Sampan, 2 kilometres wide and 2 kilometres out, the same with Tommycut, and that was closed. So that box and then into the river. They could still fish Chambers Bay, and more recently, a few years ago, commercial fishing was eliminated altogether in Chambers Bay. Now, meanwhile, down the Daly River, the Barra Classic was first held there in 1985 and 1986, and there were less than 60 barra caught over 5 full days fishing in each of those 2 years. Admittedly, it didn't have the sophisticated electronics and big boats and all that nowadays, but at the end of the day, more than half of the competitors in those 2 Barra Classic didn't catch a thing for the whole of the event over 5 days. At the same time, in the lower half of the river and out into Anson Bay, 20 plus commercial barra boats were giving a diminishing barramundi resource an absolute caning. Anyway, luckily the situation improved dramatically after that, culminating in a statement to the Legislative Assembly by the then Fisheries Minister, Marshall Perrin. Perrin had overseen a full-scale study of the recreational fishery, the short title of which was Fishing Territory. I'm going to quote a bit here. In part, he said, "I believe it is now appropriate to make a further statement on the government's resolve to determine the status of the recreational fishery and the initiatives it has taken to develop it. I do not think any member here would deny that recreational fishing is a major component of the Territory way of life. Equally beyond recognition is the fact that many tourists are attracted to the Territory simply to go fishing. Although the Territory is gaining a reputation for a diverse range of quality sport fishing, the focus of recreational fishing remains the barramundi. We are fortunate in the Territory to have the best barramundi fishing in the world. A spectacular sport fish and a highly regarded table fish, the species is very much the trademark of the Territory angling scene. The Territory's barramundi stocks are also the basis of an important commercial fishery, one which has required careful management over the years. Unfortunately, when 2 such diametrically opposed sectors compete for the one resort, the inevitable result is conflict." Well, he sure got that right. Remember, this was 1987, 37 years ago. Perrin then released the findings of a major recreational fishing survey that had taken place. He went into detail, but concluded, "We are looking at a major Territory industry, one which generates $60 million in expenditure annually and employs a total of 710 Territorians. Clearly, an industry of that magnitude with so much social appeal deserves this government's strong support. It should be fostered and it should be developed. At the same time, we must manage the resource for the future, particularly in respect of barramundi." You'd have to say those figures are quite substantial given the findings of the latest survey, nearly 4 decades later, $270 million expenditure and 2,500 Territorians employed in the recreational fishery. I rate the 80s through to the early 90s as the golden years of recreational fishing recognition and development in the Northern Territory. In 1988, Marshal Perrin moved on to become Chief Minister and Mike Reid entered the fray as Fisheries Minister. Both these Territorians were avid anglers and they had a deep rapport with what recreational fishing meant to so many Territorians, particularly in terms of lifestyle. Mike Reid closed the Daly River to commercial netting in 1988. Remember, the Marys was also closed fully in 1988. The closure line was outside the mouth of a direct line from Redcliffe to the mouth of the Reynolds River. In 1990, Marshal Perrin won a landslide election which he attributed primarily to the fishing vote, as the then opposition opposed commercial fishing river closures. It wasn't the first NT election where the recreational fishing vote was a significant contributor to the result. Admittedly, the Daly River closure was a compromise, as it still allowed commercial fishing to take place outside the line in Anson Bay. Of course, that hits to the heart of the issue today. Commercial barraboats are operating with greatly increased effort in Anson Bay and along the Daly coast. As happened nearly 40 years ago, with the Alligator Rivers being closed in Kakadu, pushing commercial fishing into the Mary and the Daly Rivers, Aboriginal waters recently closed to commercial fishing have led to greatly increased effort out from the Daly mouth in Anson Bay. There may be a lot less commercial barra licences in the NT now, but it seems we are going around the mountain again. Of course, the Daly River and the Rope and Moyle rivers are not the only areas where displaced commercial fishing effort has the potential to impact adversely on recreational fishing and barra stocks. Many of you would know my association with the Arnhem Land Barramundi Lodge. I began the lodge in 2004 and it is now being operated by one of the biggest tour companies in Australia. The Barra Lodge is widely regarded as the number one fishing lodge in Northern Australia. More than 200 interstate guests are visiting just this runoff. They are paying on average $8,000 to $10,000 each, employing more than 20 staff, both at the lodge and in Darwin, and contributing serious dollars to the community of Maningrida through lease arrangements, fishing access rights and local employment. Then there's the significant spin-off to Darwin and elsewhere in the NT, as most of these clients spend 1 to 3 nights here before or after their fishing trip. And they don't just walk to the lodge, they catch a plane. On top of that, from a conservation perspective, practically all fish caught are released. Yet a commercial barra fishing boat can turn up at any time and fish for several kilometres up the Victoria River and other waterways accessed by the Barra Lodge under signed agreement. When this happens, clients are aghast when taken past gillnet after gillnet, yellow tails hanging out and belonging to just one commercial operation with 2 or 3 crew, killing everything and not contributing 1 cent to the community. Not 1 cent. Doesn't make sense, does it? Getting back to the important closures of the Daly and Mary in 1988 and noting that commercial barramundi licence buyback schemes were put in place by the government. Did these lead to improved recreational barra fishing? Well, through the 90s in the Daly, catches in the Barra Classic escalated, often to over 1,000 barra caught, tagged and released. Turning to the Mary River and Shady Camp, this weekend there are 2 major fishing competitions taking place in the Mary, the Top End Barra Series and the annual Palmerston Game Fishing Club Shady Camp competition. There'll be over 150 boats fishing inside the river and along the Mary River coast. And you can bet there'll be a lot of barra and also threadfin salmon caught, most of which will be released. From an economic perspective, given that the typical barra trailer boat is worth $60,000 to $80,000, that's about $10 million worth of boats on the Mary this weekend. And what's the value of the Land Cruisers, the Hiluxes and the Rangers that towed those boats there? It's quite amazing. You know, today's event is an amazing initiative, but it's not the first time. Although not quite the same, 30 years ago, there was a big meeting involving leading players in the recreational fishery and a strong representation from the commercial barramundi fishery. Understandably, there was some spirited debate, but there was also an understanding that the continued reallocation of the barramundi resource from the recreational fishery, from the commercial fishery to the recreational fishery was inevitable. The thinking pros knew this, and there was consensus that government would be lobbied to provide serious funding to remove effort from the commercial fishery through lucrative licence buyback schemes. The commercial fishermen were supportive because many wanted to get out, and those who didn't were rubbing their hands with glee because of the reduced competition from other boats who would be selling back their licences and not fishing alongside them. It was actually a win-win situation, and of course the biggest winners of all were the recreational fishermen. Through the 90s and the early 2000s, buybacks reduced licence numbers and commercial fishing closures took place at Roper River, Macarthur River, Shoal Bay, Darwin Harbour and Adelaide River. Given the recent closures adjacent to Aboriginal lands, there now aren't that many options for commercial fishermen. The AFANT and NT Guided Fishing Industry Association campaign to introduce catch quotas to control effort have largely been ignored by NT Fisheries, and I'm sure David will go right into that. In fact, I understand that fisheries representatives are not attending this event, the reason being, as it was given, that it's not based on science. I'm not sure I get that. I would have thought that the opportunity for a better interaction with a large cross-section of the recreational fishing community will be something not to miss. This forum is as much about looking ways to escalate the development of the recreational fishery as anything else. I don't think it's about science-based conclusions, but let's talk about science-based conclusions for a moment anyway. What's the buzzword when it comes to evaluating a fishery, especially in this case, the NT barramundi fishery? The buzzword is sustainability. We hear it all the time. In respect of the barra stocks, we're told that, thanks to scientific research and commercial catch returns, the stocks are comfortably sustainable. However, when it comes to recreational fishing for barramundi, I've always had a problem with rubber stamping the fishery as sustainable. And I'll try and explain this clearly. Anglers basically catch barramundi using artificial lures which are either trolled or cast. About 2 minutes. It's a well-known fact that barra will almost always ignore a lure offering if they have food in their stomach. And even if they're hungry, they have to see the lure and it also needs to take their fancy. Commercial fishermen, on the other hand, use gill nets, each up to 100 metres long, that catch every barra that swims by no matter if they're hungry or not. Having a full stomach is not an excuse to avoid a gill net. Therefore, there needs to be a hell of a lot more barras swimming around to make recreational fishing for them truly sustainable. To catch them on lures, especially if you're an inexperienced angler, requires lots and lots of fish swimming nearby. To increase recreational fishing sustainability, especially for the cashed up mudfishers out there, we need to look at ways of increasing barramundi numbers available for line capture. And of course, one way is to drastically reduce commercial fishing effort. Okay, enough on sustainability. Anyway, to quote from Marshall Perrin's 1967 speech again, because it's still the blueprint. My department has allocated specific resources to develop recreational fishing as an industry in the Northern Territory. This is not a new direction, but the emphasis has increased. And my department has acquired the expertise to deal with the various features of the recreational fishery. This expertise will be put to effective use at every opportunity. Certainly by Australian standards, we have a unique resource which has enormous social and economic potential. We intend to encourage its development and achieve that potential, and at the same time guarantee its future. Just to finish, to me it's a no-brainer. We have a recreational barramundi fishery, or recreational fishery, valued at $270 million, of which at least 80% is attributable to the barramundi fishery. We have a commercial barramundi fishery which is valued at $8 million and yet accounts for more than 60% of the total catch. The recreational barra fishery ticks all the boxes, socially, economically and environmentally. The commercial barramundi fishery just doesn't stack up in any regard. The barramundi is our cash crop, and I believe it's time for the reallocation of this major territory natural resource to go the full circle. Thank you.